Life hadn't always been so bleak for Gemma Miller, the last born of the Miller family. She'd once been a happy woman, but of course this was when her dad was still alive. He was her everything, from mentor to best friend, and she always strived to make him proud. Her world came crashing down when she received that call about his sudden passing. Gemma had fallen pregnant and decided to keep the child. Her dad wanted her to return home so she could be cared for, but she wanted to keep her career going. She was away from home when her dad's nurse called her personal cell. Gemma and the nurse were good friends, so she didn't think much of the call, but the nurse's tone would tell her that this wasn't a routine call. Gemma jumped into the taxi home the minute she heard her nurse friend sobbing. Her dad had just gone into cardiac arrest. As her taxi pulled into her family farm, she saw the many car lights in the drive and knew she was out of time. The worst thing had happened. The following days were a blur for Gemma, who was stuck in a perpetual whirlwind of stomach-churning grief and guilt. Everything had blurred into nothingness around her. She only snapped back to reality when the family lawyer called her name one evening, standing in the middle of the living room with her dad's will in hand. Although Gemma's dad wasn't the wealthiest in town, he had a few properties around the county that turned heads. His lawyer read his will solemnly, dividing up the properties among Gemma and her 3 siblings. She thought she'd get something of value from everything. She'd been her dad's favorite, after all, but as the lawyer continued reading, she realized this wasn't the case. Gemma's relationship with her siblings hadn't always been the best. In fact, they rarely got along. Big brothers loathed that she was the most similar to their dad. While they were high school dropouts who didn't bother to do anything with their lives, Gemma had worked her way to college and was an assistant veterinarian in town. Gemma's dad left everything to her big brothers, save for a derelict barn some yards away from the family home. The lawyer was barely outside the house when her brothers kicked her out. They didn't care that she was in her first trimester of pregnancy or that she was their blood and flesh. "Dad's no longer here to protect you," they said triumphantly. "Go to your barn and sleep there." Dejected, Gemma pulled herself from the ground and walked away. She couldn't believe her dad would do this to her. Even more painful was her brother's treatment of her. She never understood why their hate burned so brightly. Gemma approached the building with fury and pain churning within her. She kicked at its walls and pummeled its rotten walls. Why would her family do this to her? Gemma swung around, finding a rotten-teethed man smiling behind her. Gemma cut in crossly, recognizing the man as one of the farm's neighbors. The man, a rugged farmer always caked in mud and manure, had often butted heads with her father. Hence the man only laughed and offered to buy the barn again. He even doubled his initial price, but that only made Gemma more apprehensive. She'd never known her dad as someone who kept secrets before. "If you'll excuse me," she said. The man tried to protest, but she glared at him until he walked away. Her sight took in everything: rotten floorboards and walls, rusted railings, and a tractor Gemma had never seen running. At first glance, the place looked like any other abandoned barn. But Gemma felt like there was something more than what met the eye. Gemma was in the milk house, a favorite of her dad's when she was younger, when she noticed something tucked into the wall. Her brows furrowed as she approached. Gemma reached for the item, a folded paper carefully wedged into the rotting wooden planes. Gemma wiped tears as she opened the paper. She had no idea that her life was about to change. In the paper was a note written in her dad's name. It seemed old, which didn't make sense to Gemma. The letter expressed the old man's fear of Gemma's brothers falling into bad habits when he was gone. He asked Gemma to build a life for herself, knowing she was more than capable. But at the foot of the note, there was a section about a hidden cellar door in one of the barn stalls. He had unlocked it and wanted Gemma to explore, saying he'd hidden a cupcake for her to find. Gemma's back shot straight. She remembered her younger days. Her dad had always hidden cupcakes for her in the house, asking her to root them out if she could. 9 out of 10 times, the cupcakes weren't pastries but items such as storybooks and kids' novels. And after a few minutes of searching, Gemma found the cellar door hidden under piles of dry hay and straw. She took her first step down the staircase, shining her light all over. Cobwebs caught against her face and hair as she waved them out of her way. From the looks of things, it had been a long time since anyone had been down here. Studying all she could, it was clear that this place had been sealed for a while, given how dusty it was and that her brothers didn't know about it. Regardless of how old it was, Gemma continued exploring. She didn't expect to find much down here, but the premise of a treasure hidden somewhere made her heart beat faster. If only she knew the secrets that her late dad had kept from her and her siblings. She stared at her find, suddenly frozen in place. Her lungs constricted and her mouth ran dry. How could her dad hide such things from his family? Gemma thought she'd always known her dad. She was his confidant in his older days, and he'd opened up about so much to her. But he never failed to mention all this in his stories. A sickening rush fired through Gemma. She couldn't tell if it was fear or excitement. As she walked into the room, one thing became clear. Her dad wasn't the person she'd always believed he was. When we are young, we see our parents as our heroes. The possibility of them being dangerous individuals in the outside world never occurs to us. For Gemma, such secrets would be laid bare tonight. "Cupcakes," she whispered. "Cupcakes." Lots and lots of cupcakes before her. Lined on the room's floor were wrapped packages. They covered every inch of the room from one wall to the next. Gemma squatted down and carefully picked up the first one, which had another note stapled to it. The message was short, giving her a clue of what was happening. "My little cupcake," the note started. "What makes a whiskey exquisite its age? Here are the best 1960 had to offer. Find Mr. Livingstone." There was a phone number on the paper. "He will help." Gemma opened the package, almost falling back when she saw the faint Macallan logo on a bottle of whiskey. Another package had a Glenfiddich bottle. One vintage bottle like this could go for thousands of dollars. Gemma couldn't even count the number of packages before her. She slid to the floor, her head falling in her hands.